I'm Phyllis Peterbaugh Taylor. I've lived here all my life. In fact, I live in the house that I was born in. I'll take that back. I was born in the garage. My father built the garage first, and then while we were living in the garage, he built the house. And so I have been around a long, long time. I'd like to talk to you about the post office. I was there quite a few years, in fact, about 34 years at the local post office. It all came about when I was a junior in school. I walked into the post office. The postmaster was Aaron Markley, and he says, "Phyllis, would you like a job after school and on Saturdays?" I looked at him. "I don't know. I'll go home and ask my mother." And my mother says, "Go back there. That'll give you some spending money." So I started at the post office after school and on Saturdays and during the summer months. I'd like to tell you about the postmaster, Ab Markley. He was quite a nice person. There was different views on him, but he did so much for the community. This was during World War II. Let's see, I'll start with, let me see. He would be so helpful for these mothers that were looking for letters from their boys that were in service. If a letter came from a serviceman, he'd get on the phone and call the mother up and tell her that there was a letter there from her boy. And then there was other things that he did so well. And Social Security started, I guess, in the 30s. Well, this was back in the 40s when I was working. The older people, probably my age now, they would come in, this was like on the 3rd of each month, and they wanted their Social Security check. Well, nowadays, you don't hand mail out to people that's standing in the lobby. But back then, these people would have a big time talking to each other, and then whenever their checks were there, Ab would give the checks to them before, they didn't have to wait for the carrier to come by and give them the check. Ab was very good at Christmas time. The mail would come in on Christmas morning. There would be packages. He would take all these packages on Christmas morning to each family that had a package there. So I had good memories of working with Ab Markley. The next postmaster was Everett Pearson, and he was quite a gentleman. What was right was right. What was wrong was wrong. And he was rural carrier for many years before he became a postmaster. Now, the next postmaster I worked with was Gene White. I think that's enough to say about Gene White. All in all, I think that was a good time of my life. I learned how to respect people that came in. Ab Markley says, now just remember, the only thing we have to give is service, and be sure that you greet everybody and make them feel at home.
My name is Nadine Ford Thompson. I grew up in West Milton on North Miami Street, and my grandfather, Ford, B.J. Ford, had the drugstore here in Milton, and I grew up in that drugstore. And my other grandfather had Arnold's Restaurant, which ended up as Her's Restaurant, and then later on Arnold's Fish Hatchery up on North Miami Street. I could go on and on and on about the drugstore, all things that happened. But for instance, Phyllis was talking about World War II. I remember we had the Western Union at our drugstore. And of course, telegrams would come in, and my dad had to deliver one of the telegrams of one of the servicemen that were killed here in Milton, and he was very upset about it. We had, our store was like a general store. My grandfather wanted to sell things that everyone wanted. We had all veterinary supplies. All the farmers came in to buy their pills for their cattle and their sheep and all. We had big drums of disinfectant in the back room that you had to pour out. And that way I got to know a little bit about the farms and all. And on summer Saturday nights, my grandmother Ford would pull up a chair. There was about 5 chairs in the sort of the back room by the telephone booth, and the ladies, some of the farm ladies would come in, and they'd sit down and they'd just have a circle of friends talking, and it was just so much fun. Their husbands, of course, were over at Her's restaurant, gabbing and talking. We sold everything in that drug. Wallpaper, my father spent many, many hours figuring wallpaper. I don't know whether you know much about measuring or not, but the wallpaper business was big. Besides, Kashner's also sold wallpaper. And my grandfather, of course, in those days, he would get prescriptions and actually make tablets and make the capsules, and it took a lot of time because each one, of course, had to be measured separately and all, and I'd watch him for hours making capsules for other people. During the war, Life magazine was limited. Life magazine came out, and it was a biggie. We had a list of people behind the counter that would wait for Life magazine to come in. And we had a waiting list for people. And of course, as we were talking earlier of the summertime, when the soda fountain would be activated, and the candy counter would be moved back halfway to the back of the store, and then the tables and chairs would be brought down from upstairs. And there would be at least two girls from high school would be soda jerks. And then, of course, I wanted to help too when I was younger, and they put up with me, let's say. That sort of, oh dear. But that was just a wonderful time, and that was a time with the band concerts. Of course, we were right across the street from the drugstore was where Fox's Pizza is now. We were right across the street from Her's restaurant, where the band concerts were up on the roof, and it was. You just got to meet so many people, waiting on customers. I really enjoyed it because you got to meet more people that way. You got to know them. I remember the first time when we leased the drugstore, and Kenny Karsh came in and started putting new, took the showcases out and put new display racks in, and I said, "Aren't you going to wait on the people?" He said, "No, they're going to wait on themselves, and then they'll just bring the, to the case." I couldn't get over that because I felt service was so important, and you just got to meet more people and know about them. And I can go on and on about this, but I'll pass it on to Rachel Ann.
Your grandfather also had pianos for sale, didn't they?
When my grandfather first bought the store in 1899, it was half of the size the pizza that Fox's is now, and it was a piano and Victrola. old Victrola, wind-up Victrolas. And I have the book that has all the list of prospects for piano sales. And the many of them are checked off that he sold pianos to. But then later on, people came in and said, well, why don't you sell this, and why don't you sell that? So he felt that going out of the piano business and expanding into more cosmetics and more patent medicine, wallpaper and all would be better. And so he sold that out. And when I started working there, in the back was this big rack of records. Enrico Caruso and all the real old. And I kept looking at those records and I thought, oh, what are those records there for? I mean, it's a waste of space, let's get rid of it. So my grandfather finally said, okay, you can get rid of them. So I threw them all away.
Oh, my gosh.
So, okay.
Well, I'm Rachel Ann Minnick, and I'm going to talk about Overlook Park. I have a question. Does anybody know the connection of Sharp's Mill, Pig Eye School, Possum Hollow, and the Toll House have one thing in common with Pickway, Covington, Pleasant Hill, Troy, West Milton, Inglewood? Does anybody have any idea of the connection?
Trolley.
Oh, yeah, Charlie.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm going to talk about. On June the 27th,
Can you talk just a little louder? Because see, there's microphones up there just on tape.
okay,
Talk just a little louder.
okay, on June the 27th, 1902, the traction made its first trip to West Milton. And they started at the arcade in Dayton, Ohio, and came up as far as West Milton. And they had a regular schedule from 6 a.m. in the morning until 9 at night. Can you hear me now? Okay. And then from Dayton to West Milton, there was also one at 10 o'clock and one at 11, till 11 p.m. And you had to hurry and get there or you'd get left out. And then there was another schedule that was later at night. It was for the people in Dayton to go to the Victory Theater, and they needed a way home. So at 11 o'clock, there was another one that came from there to West Milton. So, and then there was a track that went from the Mays Opera House in Pickway, and they were waiting on the people to come from the May Opera House in Pickway. The old car barn is still standing on North Miami Street. What a lot of people don't know, that on the traction line, they carried milk and freight, and also they were on a different schedule. The traction line began to build a park to attract more people to ride the traction. Boat docks were built down by the river for boating and swimming, and large picnic areas were made. Tennis courts were made, and guess what? There was a lot of gambling down in the old cave down by the river. The main attraction was the 80 by 100 structured dance hall. In the middle of the room, there was an elevated area where the bands and orchestras started. And the West Milton Christian church women made dinners for all the people that came on the weekends. And some of the young people sold soda pop and popcorn. In 1902, from 1926, Overlook Park was in its heyday. One time in 1912, you can't believe this, 1,400 employees from the Dayton Engineer Laboratory Company rode the traction from Dayton to West Milton, and they had a picnic. They spent the whole day there. What happened then in 1926, the automobile was coming into play, and so the park, it sort of fell apart, and it went into the hands of the receivers. Later on, Mr. Holmes opened a dance hall and later a skating rink, and somehow Overlook Park slipped from the public eye. And on March 1976, Mr. Holmes sold the land to Jim Sarver, and now you know the rest of the story. Go ahead, Jim.
I'm Jim Kennison. I graduated from Milton Union High School in 1953. I feel a little bit like a kid here because I'm Jim. I should wait until everyone's done before I give my remarks, but growing up in West Milton was sort of a very special thing. Back when I was a kid, like in the 40s and 50s, there were so many things that we could do, but so many things that kids have access to today that we never had. I can remember there were no organized sports, athletics, or anything of that sort. So one of our favorite things would be to go up to the baseball diamond, and maybe we'd have 6 people, 3 on a side. And it would be like if you hit anything to the right of second base or a fly ball, you were out. I mean, you had to structure your rules by the number of people you had. The first part of my life here, I lived in the country, actually on the corner of Emmerich and 48. And the house that is back off of the road now actually sat closer to 48. And it was turned so it faced Route 48. And that was a neat place to live. You know, you could see, there weren't very many cars at all going up and down 48 then. But since then, and I'm not too sure when, the house was picked up, moved back, and turned 90 degrees so it faces Emmerich Road. Down there we had, oh man, we had the country. We roamed around. We did a lot of things. We had access to the river. All we had to do was go across 48, down the hills. There were so many things down there that we whiled away the time with. There were old gravel pits down there. There was a big old gravel pit that years ago had been used. There was, if you go behind the Sunoco, just on the north side of the creek that goes through there, there was a big old barn that I think at one time had been a distillery. At least it had something to do with whiskey because they had these huge drum barrels. They were probably about this big around and this high, and they were wooden. And there were several of those in there, and I can remember my brother and a couple other guys getting in one and riding down the hill until they hit a tree. And of course you couldn't, it was so big, we weren't very large, so they couldn't take it back up, so the barrel stayed there. But there were a lot of things down there that I remember doing. I remember that we had, you didn't go to the grocery store every day like you do now. We had a old guy in an old green truck that we called Speedy. And you can probably realize why we called him Speedy, because he would go about 3 miles an hour, you know, and he would stop, and you know, people would pick up their bread or some eggs or various other things that they might need from Speedy, and we always had a penny or something for some candy that we got from him. In fact, when I moved back to West Milton after being up in Michigan for a while, we moved down to Cedar Drive, which when I was a kid, it wasn't there at all. That was part of a farm. But the first thing we did, this was back in 1969, I took my son, who was in the 1st grade, and we went down over the hill. And I said, well, now, when we were kids, we used to come down here and we used to do this. And then over here, we'd come down and we used to do this, and, you know, all these things that we used to do. And coming back, why, we sat down on a bench in the park that Bud Hoover had made down there. And he said, "Boy, Dad," he said, "I wish I lived in these today." So that was something I thought maybe I should have sent in to Reader's Digest or something. But anyway, it was so nice because even though we lived out in the country, we never locked our doors, and no one in town ever locked their doors. You just didn't have any need to. I also remember then moving into town, and that's when we then got into some organized athletics, you know, the 3-on-3 baseball, and getting some poles and bowling across the creek that, you know, went from the water plant, doing things of that sort. I remember one of the things that'll always stick in my mind is I had a paper out. I had a Dayton Daily News paper out. At that time, I think there were 3 different papers. You could get the morning paper, which was the Journal Herald. You could get the afternoon paper, which was the Dayton Daily News, and there was a Grit. Now, I'm not sure how often the Grit was distributed.
Wasn't it about every week?
Yeah,
Once a week.
Once a week.
Yeah.
yeah.
But anyway, I had a Dayton Daily News route, and I always remember Sunday mornings, getting up while it was still dark, especially in the winter, and getting out on the route, and as you're driving your bicycle along the route, smelling the coal smoke, because everyone heated their houses with coal. And Sunday mornings, why, that coal smoke, you know, on a brisk morning, why, that smell still sticks in my mind, and I know it probably wasn't very healthy, but it is quite a remembrance. Well, we had a lot of different hangouts and so forth that we probably will be bringing up later, but I think I'll end there and let the other two finish up, and then we can make some comments.
I'm Dick Markley. Richard, it says out there, but most of the time I go by Dick. I kind of prepared some things for a 3rd grade class, so I'm sure that West Milton can understand this, you know, at the 3rd grade level.
Richard.
But West Milton, as I remember it back, and I'm going to talk from about 1937 forward. And this was West Milton in the 50s, right up here. And you can see that we parked on both sides of the street. There was still room for 2 cars to go down. I don't know why we've ever gone to the parking on one side of the street, because those cars were bigger than the cars we have today. City service station sits there where the VCR rental place is now, and that became Sitco in the current stations. Notice that the peak, or the roof, is still on top of the Opera House of the old Buzz Theater building. It hadn't been taken off yet. But I lived, when I was 5 years old, right here in this building, upstairs on the north side of the telephone exchange building. So I remember a lot of things from right downtown. I could go on and on about them, but some things that stick out in my mind. Jim mentioned your homes, and you didn't have to lock your house. Well, not only didn't you have to lock your house, you had people coming into your house all the time, and one reason was the icebox. We didn't have refrigerators back at that time. Most homes in town, some had already been able to buy the new refrigerator, but most had an icebox. And an icebox looks like these right here on this picture, and the kind we had was C, this icebox right here. There was an icebox, the sign, this told you how much ice you wanted the iceman to bring you. You notice this house is right across from the telephone exchange. That's me, by the way, when I was 5 years old. And this was the Penny's house. It's next to what is, I think, PCV or something, mold company now. But you see the sign right there on that screen door. It had 25, 50, on the other side 75 and 100. That's telling the iceman how much ice to bring. Well, the ice thing always fascinated me because as young boys, we would follow the iceman through town. And he had a big truck with a canvas over the top of the ice to try to save it from melting. And as soon as he would stop, we'd jump up, move the canvas out of the way, and get slivers of ice to suck on. That was our ice cream or whatever for the summer, was to follow the Iceman truck. But you would put that sign in the window, and the Iceman would come, we would see 25 pounds, so that means you wanted 25 pounds. He has this big leather thing on one side of his body, and he takes the ice tongs, gets the ice 25 pounds and throws up on his shoulder. He comes up to the door, yells, "Iceman," and walks right in, goes to your ice box and puts the ice in. So you couldn't lock your door, you wouldn't be able to get any ice. Now you may have not been home, no one there, but he comes in and puts the ice in, as did the milkman. Milkman sometimes he would leave your milk outside on the door, but in some cases, in our case as an example, Granville Minnick, who was the milkman, brought his milk in and put it in our refrigerator. So you didn't need to worry about locking. In fact, if you locked your doors on the houses back in those days, what would happen is if you lost your key, you could go up to Wertz's and buy a skeleton key for a nickel to open anybody's house in town. Most people in that time period rented. They didn't have a home of their own yet until after World War II, and then there were a lot of new houses being built and people buying homes. But we were almost all in the same shape as far as our rental homes and what we were doing. I could go on to other things like the McKinley Building. The McKinley Building was more than just a school, it was a playground. And in the summer especially, you had a ledge around the McKinley Building, which was about 7 foot tall and maybe 8 or 9 inches wide. And that ledge was something that every boy had to go around the building on. And to prove that he could get all the way around the McKinley Building on the ledge with your fingernails in between the bricks and so forth to try to get around there. And then the big cannon, there was a cannon in front of the McKinley Building. I don't know if you can see that or not, but that cannon sat there. And even in the winter time with the sun on that cannon, you could lay your body out on that cannon. It would absorb that heat. It was a warm place to go. We gave the cannon, West Milton did, to the war effort during World War II. Now I noticed a lot of places around other towns, they still have their cannons. They didn't give them away, but we did. So the cannon is gone. I like to think of things as in the time of year too. For instance, we just got through with March. March was kite flying time in West Milton. And when March came, you would go up to Wertz's to get your kites and so forth, or the drugstore, they sold kites too. And you'd go out back of the high school building. That was the place we flew the kites. And one day I can remember especially it happened to be my kite, and that thing was going. It was going north. The wind was taking it to the north, to the northeast. And it was really doing a good job, and we ran out of string. So everybody else that was there that day, they gave me their string. We tied their string on. Then we ran out of string again. So we went up to Wertz's and we bought all the string that we could buy, and we brought that back and we tied that on. Finally, the kite dropped. It was gone. So now we followed the string north to see where it went. Well, the string was over housetops, in trees, it was everywhere. And up where now, back of Stan Hissong's house and where the big water tower is, that's where the kite had come down.
Wow.
It had gone that far. So we think that's a record of kite flying in West Milton. And you remember things different too. I remember the land down below the park that gets underwater when the water comes up high and then of course recedes. We called that Tarzan Island. Well, another Bob Saltmarsh, who lived in town at that time, he remembers it as Treasure Island. So I guess it's a matter of what you remember. But it was a treasure too, because when the water was up, things would float down from the north in the Stillwater River, and they would clog up in the trees and so forth down on what I call Tarzan Island. So you'd go down to see what the new treasures are when the water receded. Tarzan Island was called that because you had vines on the trees down there that could be cut and then swing on. You could swing on these vines, and that was a lot of fun to do in the summertime. The mentioned the drugstore, Nadine. Not only did they sell all the drug products and everything else that a general store would sell, but they also were the license plate people, depending on who was in office politically. Well, the big deal in West Milton was to have your same license plate number year after year, like 800 UM or 51 UM, or in my case, 61 UM. Well, you knew where the UM and the UN plates came from. They started with 59, that was the lowest, and they went up from there, and then they went to the UN when the UMs were out. Well, I wanted a low license plate. And so I go into Nadine and I beg for a low license plate. Well, they're all marked. People have them, and they have till tonight, at 9 o'clock when we close, to get their license plate. And so I waited, and when the time was up, there was about 3 two-digit license plates left. The lowest one was 61 UM, so I said, I want 61 UM, so Nadine gave it to me. I think the next day, the guy that had 61 UM came in. There was a big fuss, but I've had 61 UM, and it's on my car out there right now, and that's over 60 years ago. So those were some of the things we tried to do. Jim mentions the organized sports. We played a lot of round town, and that everybody that you could get together, you played round town. I thought that was the greatest softball game or hardball game, whichever ball you played it with, because you got to play every position. You get up to your out, then you go out to the outfield. You go to right field, center field, left field, and come back in, third base, shortstop, second base, first base, pitcher, catcher, and batter. And so you got to play everything. It was a great game. There wasn't anybody out there liming the fields and manicuring the base lines and so forth. You had to do it all on your own. And when you had the ball and you went home, the game was over because no one had another ball. But, and then back of the West Mountain Inn, that was a great place to go because of the waterfalls there. And that's where we got our clay. You could go back under that falls and you had this green clay and make things. So that's where we would go to get clay to do those kinds of things. The Vores Woods, which is back of where Linda Vore's house is now, the old Vore house, there's a big woods back there that the Boy Scouts, we would set our tents up back there and our hammocks and so forth in the woods in the summer and leave them up all year. They allowed us to use that woods for that purpose. And Jim mentioned the pole vaulting, the poles that we would go across creeks with, and we used pawpaw trees to do that with. We cut a pawpaw tree, and they were nice and straight and a little bit flexible and strong. And gee, I learned that, hey, that's a sport in track, pole vaulting. I earned a letter doing that in track after we learned it in the Scouts. The Buzz Theater building, when I was 5 years old, the doors would be open. There was a big door in the back with a fire escape that came down and one on the side of the building, also in the alley. And you could go up there, and gee, what a place that was. I don't know what it looks like up there now because it's been years since I've been in the Buzz Theater. But back then, there was a big stage. there was a floor that was slanted with all the theater-type chairs, and then all the graffiti on the walls of the classes in Milton that had their plays there, and talking about all those things. It was really nice. And then Mr. Gebhardt bought the place, and he took the slanted floor out and all the chairs and put in a boxing ring, because he opened up an athletic club for boxing up there. Down below, where Houston's hardware store was, in the Buzz Theater, that was been the south end of the building, was a Farmall, Houston's Farmall Farmall store. And Gene, the son of Harold Houston that owned the store, he and I, about the same age, we would get on those tractors and act like we were driving the tractors all through the fields. But next door to that was a duck pin bowling alley. And I would set pins in that duck pin bowling alley, and because they didn't have automatic setters in. The duck pin bowling alley is a smaller alley and a smaller ball and smaller pins than what you know as a regular bowling alley. And then to get paid, they would throw the money down the lane, and I'd go pick it up. And then shortly after that went down, they came in there with the public library. The library was in that building. I could go on and on talking about growing up in West Milton, but I'll let Bob have a chance here.
I'm Bob Emmerich, and I've been around this town a few years too. I think close to 80 out of 84. But in any event, I have a lot of fond memories of West Milton too. And the one thing nice about being the last one, everybody's talking about it, so that's the end of the program. No, I have a lot of fond memories of West Milton, and Nadine talked about the downtown and the band, and there used to be an old boy come in town about 5 o'clock, park right there in front of the bank, Shap Chappelle.
Yep.
He had the farm out here where the trailer park is now, and Shap would sit there till the band concert was over with. And the town was really loaded with people at that time. And I like to tell the story that, you know, for 50 cents, I could go to the movie, I could go down to Clarence Smith popcorn stand, get a bag of popcorn, and go to hers and get a Coke, and have a few and a little change left over. But now, if you had a date, you'd get by on $1. But we talked about automobile agencies here a little bit ago, and I think at one time there was the Chrysler Plymouth, or Chrysler, I don't know then, and there was Hudson Essex. Rachel Ann has pictures of that, and I do too. Hudson Essex Garage. There was a Pontiac agency, a Chevrolet agency, a Ford agency, and the same way with grocery stores. That many agencies in West Milton, and the same way with grocery stores. At one time, Elliman's had a market right there at Dewey Martzell's place, and across the street was Brown's Grocery, and you came on down the street to A&P Market, and then Vern Stoltz had a store over in the corner, and Billy Zink's had a meat market across the street there. So, you know, the town was really, I really enjoyed the town at that time. And we had a few characters around this town at that time, too. And I don't know who I told to a little bit ago, but I think Moon Earhart came to West Milton about 1939, somewhere along that time frame. Anyhow, a stranger was going through town one time and stopped and asked Moon, he said, Moon, or he said, is there a good restaurant in town? And Moon said, well, you got Hers Restaurant down the street here, and you got Miami Grill up the street here. He said, it don't make any difference which one you go to. You wish you went to the other one. So there was a few people around town, and really and truly, Dallas, Nadine, Rachel Ann, Jim, and Dick here's covered everything that I can think of. So I think I'll just end it there, and if I can answer any questions, I'll be glad to do it.
You know, Phyllis mentioned Ab Markley. Well, Ab was my great uncle. And one thing I remember that was parked back of the post office for quite a few years was his sled. Now, when I say sled, what this thing was is it was a great big sled deal that he could pull behind the car. And it had kind of a railing. The top of it was about like this rail right here. And what you would do is straddle that, sit on it, and your feet then are down on the runners of the sled. And he would pull that behind his car with West Milton people all lined up on it, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, all over the county, up to Pete Hill or Covington and all over the place, because they didn't have snow plows back then plowing the snow. When it snowed, the snow was on the roads. And I can remember Ab pulling that thing. I don't know if you remember that or not.
I don't remember it very well, but I've heard about it.
Yeah.
On Saturday nights, on the summertime, no one's talked about the boys and the girls. Up where the interior decorating store is the wrought iron fence. And all the boys would line up along the wrought iron fence, and then all the girls would circle around the town, down one side and up the other.
I remember
Past-
that well.
And it was just a wonderful time. It was just a wonderful time, Doug. I'm so blessed that I was able to grow up in this era, because we had so many friends and we had so much fun, innocent fun. And,
I think, Nadine, that you brought that up about downtown West Milton, and Bob mentioned it when you said something about shoulder to shoulder, and that was really true. Saturday night in West Milton, Ohio, was really a big deal. Everything was open. People were shoulder to shoulder going up and down the streets. The popcorn, Mr. Smith's popcorn stand, which was between the brick house and Wirtz's, it was there in that
Under the fire escape.
roadway, yeah, under the fire escape there. And then they would have movies, free movies in the back of either Wirtz's, and sometimes the movie would be set up in back of the Milton Federal Savings and Loan Building. But people would take the back seat of their car out and set it on the ground to sit on. You don't think about taking your back seat of your car out today, but they did that. And you would have the free movies down there for the kids to watch, and it just was a big time. And you could buy in West Milton, Ohio, anything you wanted. Bob mentions the cars. Any car you wanted could be bought here. We had dress shops, bakeries, hardware stores, and Bert Pemberton's hardware store was something, because you could buy saddles and bridles and anything like that you wanted. So you didn't even have to go out of West Milton. And we had people back in those days that probably had not been out of West Milton, lived here their whole life.
But Dick, also, people on Saturday night didn't start shopping until after the band had played.
No.
And the stores were open till 11, 12 o'clock at night.
yeah, we never closed till 12 o'clock.
Yeah. They just mill the streets and visit and listen to the band up there on the marquee. And probably about 9 o'clock, then the woman would go to the grocery store and start buying her groceries. And about 10 o'clock, they'd head home. You're right, yeah.
World War II was what happened to West Milton, because things changed.
Yes, it did.
Gasoline prices, or gasoline was limited. At the store, in the summertime, we'd have to buy 25 pounds of ice sherbet for 5 pounds of ice cream. And it ended up, they finally had to close the store, the ice cream part of the store, because you couldn't make sodas, chocolate sodas, and sundaes out of sherbet. And
Okay, Nadine, you And I said about the automobile agencies, that's really and truly what happened to a guy by the name of E.L. Miller, Ford Agency, because Ford, he had to buy so many parts for every car he sold, and it broke him. It really and truly did. So it's true, that's what happened.
Yeah.
And I like to tell too, I was in World War II a couple of years, and I was stationed down in Oklahoma for a while. And every once in a while I'd go home and reverse charges. And we had several telephone operators up here that were characters. And one of them, when I'd call home, and at that time, they transferred your call from Oklahoma to St. Louis and on and so forth. Anyhow, there was one operator, she'd get on the line and I'd give her the number to my home, and she'd say, "Is that you, Bobby?" It was nice growing up in a small town. It really was.
Sometimes on Sunday, I'd go down to the telephone exchange. Barbara Waymeyer was the telephone operator on the weekend. And Edie Lutz would always be gone on Sunday. She lived in the back part of the telephone. So we'd sit there and I'd help Barbara with the switchboard. That was so much fun. We had one romance started we connected one girl and one fella, and they kept talking and talking. He was in Dayton and she was here, and they ended up getting married, and they had a nice long marriage. But that was fun.
You kept them connected, didn't you?
Were you privy to any of the conversations that went on?
Yeah, you could be very easy.
Yeah.
Just turn the switch.
Really, Jim, you had to be on a party line out in the country, and that was,
We were,
Okay.
yeah, for a while when we were out in the country.
It was just recently, too, that there was an article in the paper about Charles Anderson, the marshal here in West Milton. And I remember when I was young, he was the marshal. He didn't call him sheriff or policeman, but they called him marshal. And I wanted to shoot his gun. And I would keep begging him. I would say, "Mr. Anderson, please let me shoot your gun. Let me shoot your gun." He'd, "No, you can't shoot my gun. You can't shoot my gun." Finally, he said, "Okay, come on." So we walked down past Mr. Smith's popcorn stand, over the hill where now you're doing all the sledding, where the sledding takes place. He took the gun out. He held it up there and with me, both of us holding it, and we pulled the trigger and shot down over the hill. So I got to shoot Marshal Anderson's gun. Well, you wouldn't find a policeman letting you do that today.
You know, that brings to mind something else, and you guys will remember. Back during this time, Milton took care of its own refuse. And it all went across the river, and to the right, and down along the river was our dump. And everything was taken to the dump there. Well, one of the big sports was to go down there at night with a rifle and a flashlight and shoot rats. I mean, it was full of rats. So I can remember that.
We went down and would go through the junk pile and bring stuff home.
Well, yeah. Yeah, everything that was tossed out went there.
There were a lot
So,
of antiques down there.
Charlie Kashner did too.
Yeah, Charlie.
Oh, yeah.
you guys remember, I'm sure most of you do, the cut over here going down across the river, when it was so narrow, and it was nothing to go down there some morning and have the road blocked by falling rocks. How many times have we seen that cut? I think about 3 times where they widened that thing out.
Yeah.
Right.
And you know, I mentioned Tarzan Island and Treasure Island and how we remember it, those names. We had another area, which is where the tennis courts are in Milton now, was I called Big Hill. Bob Saltmarsh called Big Ridge, but or the Ridge. He called it the Ridge, I called it Big Hill. But what that area was through there is where the train tracks came.
Yeah.
And it was a complete jungle back there until that was all cleared out for those, for the tennis courts. But that was a great place to play too. You could be in Milton on a sidewalk and then all of a sudden you're into there and you're in a whole big wooded area with a big hill where the train was, that track actually was. And we called it, I still say it was Big Hill.
The firemen one year flooded an area with part of that big hill, you say, for ice. Do you remember that? Ice skating.
Yeah, yeah.
It was back there.
Well, and also we
I don't
had,
think it turned out too successful, did it?
we had an airplane land back there. Let's see, I was 3 years old, so I don't remember that except what I'm told. But it was a barnstormer in a Waco airplane, had landed back where now our elementary building is, and took rides. You could, like $2 or something, it was for rides. And I remember they tell me that my father got in the airplane and set me in his lap, and that my mother cried the whole time we were gone. But we took the ride.
That, prior to that, yes, there was a barnstormer was coming every once in a while over here on what was called the Hard Kelly Farm. And you guys know where that's at. And that's where I took my first airplane ride. And I couldn't have been over, oh, I don't know, 6 years old at the most. And
No
that's
one-
where I took my first ride.
No one's talked about Halloween downtown.
Oh, my,
my
no.
goodness.
When they
Yes,
blocked
but-
Miami Street.
I'd be eager to get downtown to see what was going on, because in those days, the bank, which was right next door to our drugstore, they always loaded the bank with all kinds of things.
Well, usually an outhouse.
Always
Man, there was a drinking fountain there.
That was,
drinking.
That was
That-
Bud Hoover, Bud
Jim,
Hoover,
that house they said on there was Mr. Winkler's Hotel.
Oh, yeah.
Remember
He was
that?
He was a superintendent.
He
of
owned a
school.
little hotel in Indiana, and they took an outhouse, put it down over the drink fountain, painted on there Winkler Hotel.
Well, we put one down, and it may have been yours. Were you married to Jack and living on Front Street there?
No, never on Front Street.
Okay,
Always
well, he
Miami
was living
Street.
there, I think, on
He
Front,
lived on Miami Street.
was it Miami Street?
Uh-huh.
Well, anyway, we got one there and got it all the way down because he made it clear that he was gonna be supervising something at the north end of
Oh,
town.
Somebody,
Yeah, so an outhouse got there
yeah. And
mysteriously.
And some of those things were done with adults, not
Oh, yeah, well,
like
yeah, well,
Barclay and
Bud,
Bud Hoover.
yeah, Bud Hoover, they always did that.
when you mention Halloween, that really was shoulder to shoulder. The whole downtown
yeah.
area, the street, all of it was shoulder to shoulder, and the confetti. And then they got into the shoe polish.
Yep.
And they would
That-
take the shoe polish and smear it on you,
That
and then
ruined-
throw confetti into your eyes.
Oh,
with it.
yeah.
And that stopped the whole thing. It finally quit because it got too out of hand. But it was like the Bradford Pumpkin Show.
Now, these are stories that I never told my kids, because I didn't want them to do the same thing.
People would come from Dayton for Halloween because we had a contest, costume contest. And the platform was right in front of hers, right across from the drugstore, so I'd get to see everybody. And the costumes were beautiful, beautiful. They'd rent them. They were, oh, I remember this one black beaded hooped skirt, gorgeous. And then they started with the shoe polish one year. So the merchants got together that sold shoe polish and lipstick, because they did lipstick too. And they said that they would stop selling lipstick and shoe polish right before Halloween, so the celebration could continue. Well, most of the merchants did abide by the rules they made. One did not, and that ruined Halloween.
Well, then they used to have Halloween on Washington Street. They did that for a long time.
Yeah, but I'll
Yeah,
tell you,
but
the
that
one
wasn't
on, the
costume.
one on Miami Street, when they blocked it off.
That
from-
was,
That
oh,
was-
yeah.
That was,
big.
boy, I'll tell you,
Yeah,
you couldn't walk up the street, could you, Nadine?
No. no. It was beautiful.
Yeah. And that was,
It was a shame.
well, okay.
You know, I remember also 4th of July. Now, back then, fireworks were legal.
Yeah.
And I remember that we used to get catalogs, and I don't even know the name of the companies anymore, but there were companies that you could buy fireworks from. And for $5, I can remember getting a box of fireworks about this big, like this, just everything in there imaginable. Well, you know, you couldn't do that today, but we ordered them well, it wasn't through the mail. They came to the depot at Ludlow Falls, and you'd have to go up to the depot and pick up your fireworks. And of course, during that time, Milton didn't have any fireworks displays. Everyone went to Miller's Grove. And Miller's Grove had usually a very, very large, nice display. One year, it sticks in my mind, I'm not sure, I was probably in high school. It was always above the swimming pool where they had the fireworks display. Well, everyone was seated and everyone was ready to go. The fireworks started off, and all of a sudden, wham, bam, bam, bam. So a spark. They kept all the stuff in some big horse tanks up there, and apparently a spark had gotten in one. It was like a battlefront. I mean, there were things flying and going. People were running away back into the park. It was really a mess. But no, I don't think anyone got hurt. There may have been some guys got burned up above, but no one really got hurt badly. But the 4th of July was always really big, I thought.
Well, and you mentioned buying fireworks. You could buy them right here in town, too.
Oh, yeah.
Phyllis mentions my great-uncle Ab Markley. He had a fireworks stand in a tent in the woods where Roy Miller's
Yeah.
funeral home became. And he would set that up every fireworks to make a little extra money, I guess, and he would sell fireworks down there.
There was always, in Union, it was Valley View Inn? Was that
Yes.
the tavern?
Valley View.
Beside it, there was always a fireworks tent too, that you could
I've heard
buy
about that
fireworks.
place, but I've never been there.
Oh, Bob.
Well, that was a favorite spot. That was a favorite spot for a lot of people from Milton. Because
tell
I
you-
can remember Dad, you know, at that time, the people that worked in Dayton shared rides. Because of gas rationing, you know, rubber, you couldn't buy tires, you couldn't buy this, you couldn't buy that. So everyone shared rides. And he had, I think, four of the guys from Milton here that went down to Frigidaire shared rides. Well, this was one of the stops on the way home. You know, it was very common for people to stop in and have a beer before they got home. So that
They
was,
could have a hard liquor
There
drink.
there was
they
another,
probably could do that.
there was another one right on down the street that was even better.
Oasis.
Is that right, in Union?
Yeah,
Yeah, Oasis.
it was right there
On
where
the
there's
corner.
a filling station out right now.
Yeah.
A guy by the name of John Spiller had it.
Okay.
And boy,
Well, you mentioned characters too, Bob, and that's,
Oh.
you go to the Hers restaurant and you think of Wag. Wag Her was a character. The things he-
Wag was about this tall,
well,
and-
always had a cigar about that long in his mouth. How it ever got that
And
short, I don't
I
know.
can remember that we had one of the people here in town that would come in for coffee, and back then you bought coffee by the cup. You didn't just one fee and you get. But he would come in and he would say, "Hey Wag, how about warming this up a little bit?" So Wag put a little more coffee in, and pretty soon he said, "Wag, would you mind warming this up a little bit?" And he'd put a little more in. And then he said, Wag, how about warming this cup up? And he just poured the coffee all over his lap. He says, is that hot enough?
Well, he set it on the burner one day, he got the cup hot. And then Bustle, his brother, somebody went in there one day at noontime to get lunch, and mashed potatoes was on the menu. Jim knows about it.
I was gonna tell this one.
Yeah, the guy, they brought him, the mashed potatoes weren't ready, so they brought his dinner out to him, and they were boiled potatoes. And he told Bustle, he said, I ordered mashed potatoes. He grabbed the fork, he says, I'll mash your damn potatoes.
Some people say,
People would call in, ask Wag when the next bus was going to Dayton. And they'd say, do you know when the next bus is going? And Wag says, yes, and hang up.
well, you know, too, people didn't buy their ice cream then at the grocery stores already pre-packed. You went down to hers and you got hand-packed ice cream. And if you try to scoop ice cream out now yourself at home, think of Wag down there, this little guy with the, as Jim says, a little tiny cigar stub hanging out his mouth. You think it's going to fall into the ice cream. But he's digging down in there and sweat is coming off of him as he's packing that ice cream because it was really hard work. But that ice cream was good. I think it was Seal Test.
One time, Susie?
One time, some kid came in and he was making a lot of noise there at Wag's place. And Wag was getting annoyed by that kid. And he says, here's a quarter, go down to Hoover's.
Well, during that time, we had more pool halls
Yeah.
than you could imagine. We had hers, had pool. Bud Hoover's down to my girl had a pool hall. Red Dickey had the Bloody Bucket. They had a pool hall, and there was there another one?
One other was the sweet shop.
Yeah.
It's where the hen's nest is right now.
Dickie's Cleaners.
And that
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
and there was a
But
pool.
Dickey's Cleaners
there
was
was
in there.
that.
one
Yeah.
time, yeah.
That was called the sweet shop. And that's the only place in town for many, many years where a guy got shot in West Milton. In there.
I didn't know that.
I forget what his name was. I know it.
Well, who were the owners of the sweet shop?
I
Right on the
think,
tip of my
I
tongue.
think, was it the Pops?
Pops. Herb and Les Pop.
Yeah, Herb Pop.
Herb and Les Pop, and they left here, went to Michigan,
Right.
opened up a
Opened a
resort
resort,
up
yeah.
in Manistee Lake above on the Upper Peninsula, and this is where West Milton went to go fishing
Yeah,
then.
right.
Okay.
So I think we'll close off the tape, but everybody's welcome to stay as long as you want, and I would hope that people have enjoyed it enough that you want to continue and do this again, have some different people, different ideas, different input. But I thank you for the panel, I appreciate it. And you're welcome to stay around as long as you like.
That was fun.
It was fun.
Well, it brings